Welcome back, legends. I hope you're all fantastic. On today's video, I want to compare the sound of an amplifier running through a speaker cabinet and a microphone in a room versus the same amp through a reactive load box and some IRs. There's always going to be plenty of discussion about one, how accurate this method is, and two, aesthetic choices like, is this cheating to record your guitar through a load box and IRs? Does it make everything too easy or too generic? Or as somebody who makes demo videos on YouTube, am I cheating my audience if I choose to use a load box and some IRs? There's plenty of room for discussion about those things, but basically I want to break this down into a few sections. The first one is I want to compare the sound of a given rig. In this case, I'm going to play my PRS CE24 standard through my Tone molecular and a Marshall TV cab. I'm going to mic it up with a Sennheiser MD421. I've also captured an IR of that setup, and we're going to compare the sound through my Fractal load box and that same IR. From there, I want to isolate the sound of the different loads, and by load, I mean the impedance loading of the amplifier on the speaker cabinet or the reactive load in there. We'll have a listen to the difference that makes, at least between the cabinet that I've got here and the load box that I've got here. And then finally, we'll talk about why you might want to use either a load box and IRs or a real speaker cabinet and some microphones when you're making glorious guitar noises. Let's go. The first test that I want to do is to compare the sound of the microphone and cabinet to the IR. What I've done is I've mic'd up this Marshall TV cab over here. That is a Sennheiser MD421 microphone. And I've captured an IR of this setup. I actually used the IR utility in my Axe-FX 3 to do this. It has a mic plus DI mode on there, which essentially will filter out any influence from the power amp that you use to make the impulse response. That should keep things nice and consistent. Furthermore, I've placed this Fractal X load in between the head and the cab. So the actual load being provided here is coming from the cabinet. The X load is essentially just giving us a nice clean DI. I'm recording both signals at the same time. This is what we get. Purposefully didn't label when the sound was changing in there. I wanted that to be a blind comparison. And I've been sitting here listening to that clip a bunch, and I can hear some very subtle differences, notably in the low end on there. I do wonder if that comes down to the maximum IR length that I'm using on my IR loader. I'm actually just using my Axe-FX as an IR loader. There is a great Pete Thorne video out there if you want to have a listen to the impact that impulse response length makes on the overall tone of an IR. Also, the room that I'm shooting in, I don't normally mic up my cab in here. There's some weird low-end resonances and things like that. So maybe having all that extra room information in there does make a subtle difference. But I think overall, they are so close. That is more than close enough for rock and roll. If you put that into a mix and you start double tracking your guitars, filtering them, adding in other instruments, I don't think anyone is really going to care as long as you've got your tone dialed in and it's appropriate, and more importantly, what you're playing is cool. I think that is going to make a much bigger impact on the overall tone than the difference there, where I made an IR of the speaker and microphone and compared it directly with the same load. Speaking of the load though, next I'm going to remove the microphone from the equation, and we're going to have a listen to the impact that the load makes on here. To do this, I'm simply going to disconnect the cabinet on here. So we're going to hear the sound of the fractal reactive load now on the UK setting against the sound of the impedance load of this Marshall cabinet on here. We'll start with the cabinet. I'll play the same riff, then I'll just pull the cable and we'll hear just the sound of the load box. It's the same IR on each of these. So we're still hearing the DI output from the Fractal X load. What is changing is the speaker load. Definitely less subtle. You could hear the load coming from the speaker cabinet had this kind of rattier top end in there, but I thought the reactive load had a slightly tighter, chunkier low end going on, probably had a slightly lower resonant frequency on there, which I definitely enjoyed. And to clarify there, the sound that you were hearing was still the DI from the load box processed by the same IR. Any differences were coming from the fact that when I connected the speaker cabinet, the amp is basically seeing the load from the speaker cab. When I disconnected the speaker cab, it was seeing the load from the reactive load. And there are some limitations in reactive load design. Basically, you'd need to add more inductors to the design, the overall cost of components and the size of the unit would go up. It would be interesting to try to build a reactive load box. Like, price isn't an issue that can get as close as possible to a real speaker cabinet. Of course, different speaker cabinets are going to have different impedance behaviors as well. One thing that I find particularly cool about the amp modeling in my Axe effects is that there is modeling of different speaker impedance curves, and they definitely make a difference to the sound and the feel of the amp models in there. And you can see just a couple of examples that I've taken screenshots of. They are markedly different in their behavior. So that's pretty interesting. It's also worth noting that different load boxes, like different cabinets, are going to have different behavior in terms of their load. For example, the 2-Notes load boxes and the Universal Audio aux, their impedance curves actually don't really look like a real speaker cabinet. And again, that's just a matter of accuracy. If you want super accurate behavior, something like the Fractal load box or the Sir reactive load are going to have an impedance curve that looks a lot more like a real speaker cabinet. But if you like the sound out of your 2-Notes or your aux, really it's all about just liking the sound at the end of the day, understanding that maybe it's not as accurate as the load you will get from a real cabinet is important information, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's as much of a deal breaker. If you wanted accurate behavior, you could just use the speaker through and still get the load from your cabinet. The main thing with miking up a speaker cabinet though, I think is the fact that you're miking up a speaker cabinet and you can move the mic. It takes a couple of seconds to move a microphone around to change the frequency response versus having to scroll through a list of IRs, or, if I was going to do the comparison, move the mic, shoot an IR, move the mic, shoot an IR. Let's just hear a very quick comparison between 3 different mic positions on the same speaker cabinet. Moving the mic a little bit makes such a big difference compared to any of these other methods. We were kind of splitting hairs looking at the reactive load and IR versus the mic and cabinet. Maybe we were kind of splitting pieces of string cheese or something like that when we're looking at the impedance behavior. but there's such a massive difference when you just move the microphone around. And I think that is one factor why miking up guitar amps is still a tried and true method. You get your amp dialed in, you get the mic close to where you like it, you start playing along with the track and you go, could be a little bit brighter. Move the mic closer to the cone. Or it's too bright, move it further away, move it out from the cabinet. You get this massive continuous space of options versus, again, either using the one IR or having discrete entries from an IR pack. And there are pieces of software out there that let you mimic that behavior. For example, the Axe-Fx has Dynacabs, the Helix has a movable mic, the Neural DSP Quad Cortex also has a similar layout, and there are plugins like ML Sound Labs Miko, which let you kind of move a virtual microphone around. Basically, they've gone and done the hard work and captured lots of IRs at different points of the speaker cabinet on there to do that. And also, it kind of locks you in once you've mic'd up your amp on there and you've committed to that guitar sound and you put it to tape, although almost no one records to tape anymore. You put it into your DAW, you are going to commit to that sound, and then when you start mixing and playing, you're going to tailor everything to that fixed point. If you just record with a load box and say you take the DI, there's always that little thing in the back of your mind which says, you can just change the IR, Leon. You can maybe get it that little bit extra, bit more good on there. And then you can mix the rest of the track, which I think is really important from just a human psychology perspective. And when you're working, trying to make music or record demos or just play guitar for fun, that tendency to want to tweak and overcorrect and maybe get lost in the minutia can detract from the experience of just having some fun making some guitar noises. I think that's really, really important. However, if you've got a little bit of discipline and you've got some good IRs that you know work, this is kind of the way I like to do that. I've captured IRs of my real cabinets and I just use them as a kind of fixed point in what I'm doing, and I'll change the amp or I'll change the rest of the signal chain if I want something different. So in conclusion, is using a real cabinet better than using a load box and IRs? I don't think so. I also don't think using a load box and IRs is cheating. In fact, I think the idea of cheating to get a guitar sound is looking at it the wrong way. You know, guitar and making cool noises is kind of all about cheating and pushing the limits and finding the edge cases. It's really easy to forget that, you know, a generation or two ago, people were trying to design amplifiers that didn't have distortion. Studio engineers were telling guitar players to turn down and the distortion sounded bad. Imagine if you never had guitar players who were willing to push those limits and say, no, you know what? I actually like the sound of this cranked up Marshall amplifier with my Les Paul. I'm going to commit it to tape and I'm going to create an iconic guitar sound like Eric Clapton did on the Beano album. And bands like Black Sabbath, who just played super loud and slow and mutilated blues and broke the rules, essentially creating new genres. And people are doing that as well in the digital realm now, you know. This is fun, using real amplifiers and cabinets and load boxes and IRs. There's loads of great music being made with plugins or just by processing guitars in non-traditional ways. There's also loads of crap music being made that way, but crap music isn't a new thing. It's always existed. It's always going to exist. That's just the nature of the beast. So my advice would be, don't get too hung up on what you can and can't do with your rig. If you like miking up your real cabinet and blowing off your eyebrow hair with the searing intensity of sound coming out of your rig, good for you. I think that's awesome. It's great, and it's a great way to enjoy playing guitar. Just use some hearing protection so that you can enjoy that long into your life. If you don't have the ability to crank up cabinets and microphones, you're not missing out. A good reactive load box and some good quality IRs can create some amazing guitar sounds. So with all of that, go and play some guitar. Let me know what you're playing through in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers. Thank you.